Now we're up to Daf Beis, Amid Beis. Why should the sequence in the Sefer be in the reverse? Because, on the contrary, the greatest chiddush to say that he's chayav would have been, even though the members of the court themselves ate that chalev, in which case he is really just riding on the coattails of the judges, and therefore he should be potter. And instead, the Mishnah ends up with the case where none of the court members of the court ate the chalev. Now the Gemara says that there's another style in the Mishnah, in addition to Lomi Boy, I'm sorry, in addition to Lozu Afzu, in which we're building up to the greatest chiddush, the Mishnah has another style, another literary style, which is called Zu V'Ein Tzarich Lomar Zu, which means that we go from the biggest chiddush down to the lower chiddush. The biggest chiddush is that if he joined together with the members of the court, either first he and then they, or they and then first he, nevertheless he's chayav. You would have said, wait a minute, he wasn't the only one who ate this chalev. The members of the court ate that chalev. And therefore he should be potter, kamashmal, and know that even so, he's chayav. And it goes without saying that if they didn't eat the chalev, for sure he's chayav. Next. The Mishnah says, "V'yada echad mehem sheto o talmid v'roi lo ra tarti lama li." Why does the Mishnah have to tell me both one of the members of the court and a talmid who is worthy to sit in the court? Amar Rava Itzrek Salke dat Chamin, I would have said, Hani mili de gomer v'savir. When do you classify someone as worthy of sitting on the court? He has two qualities. You could check off two boxes. Number one, he's gomir. Gomir means he knows. He has established his knowledge of all the relevant dinu. And then there's another qualification called savir. Savir means svara. He has a logical ability to dissect the ruling and apply it to other cases through analogy. Aval gomir v'savir, gomir v'lo savir lo. But if he has the knowledge, but he doesn't have that intellectual expertise and insight to compare one case to the other and derive conclusions from case A to case B through analogy, I would think in such case that he's not roy to sit on the Bezdin, even though he's Gomir, but he doesn't have Savir. And in such a case, he should be Potter. Kamashma, the Mishnah speaks of both a member of the court and a Talmud to tell you that even the Talmud is Chayav, even though he hasn't reached the level of the member of the court, because he's Gomir v'lo Savir, but nevertheless he's Gomir, and he has the knowledge that's necessary, and therefore he's guilty, and he'll bring the carbon. Amalei Abaye. Abaye's not happy with Rava. Lahora. Gomir v'Savir mash. I mean, take a look at the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, where is it? Vehu roi lahora. Those three words. So you're saying that he doesn't have these two qualifications, and yet the Mishnah says that he's chayav. No. The Mishnah is talking about somebody who's royal hora. If he's royal hora and he's worthy to sit on the bezdin, then he's got to have both qualities. Amalei Rav responds, "Ano hachikomin." And it seems that Rava is accusing Abai of misunderstanding what he, Rava, meant. What I meant is, Imeahi, if I only had the first case of a judge who understood that Bezdin made a mistake, I would have said, Hani mili gomer v'savir. Then I would have said that if you extend the chiyuv to the case of a Talmud, he's got to be on the same level of gomer v'savir, aval gomer v'lo savir lo, tana roy lahora. So the roy lahora now becomes totally superfluous, because if the Talmud has both qualities, then Memela he's exactly in the same status as the member of the court who knew that they had made a mistake. So it's a Mishnah Yisera. What's the purpose of the Mishnah Yisera? Afilu gomer v'lo savir, savir lo gomer. If he has one of those two qualities, then he's guilty because he knows that they made a mistake. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. Roy lahora, etc. Kagon man, give me a person who's roy lahora. Kagon Shimon ben Azai and Shimon ben Zoma. So these were the two greatest Tanoim of their particular generation. And their scholarship would make them fit to judge. In the footnote here, he quotes a Gemara in Sanhedrin Yud Zayin, that whenever we find the phrase Danim Lifnei Chachamim, we debated it in the presence of the Chachamim, it's a reference to Shimon ben Azai and Shimon ben Zoma. However, they never actually had smicha, and therefore they're called Talmidim. Amalei Abaye, ki hai gavna mesidhu. I don't get it. If you're talking about a level of knowledge like Shimon ben Azai or Shimon ben Zoma, these are the greatest scholars of their generation, you can't tell me that they fit into the category of a shogeg. They know the halacha. And if they went ahead and ate the chalev, that's called mezid. If they're Edom and El Sra, they should get malchus for it. Well, why are you calling it a shogeg? Why are you telling me that the chayiv of korban chatos, they should be chayiv malchus as a mezid? So Rebbe says, L'taimeich, according to your logic, Abaye, Hadasanya, when it says in the Brisa Basosa Achas, meaning he transgressed one of the commandments of Hashem, and the Brisa darshans Yochid ha'osa mipi atzmo chayav, boras bezdin potur. Ketzad, what's the case of a Yochid who, on his own, based on his own understanding, he ate the chalev, as opposed to someone who relied on bezdin? Ketzad. Choru bezdin shechalev muter. One of the members of the court knew that they made a mistake. Oh, Talmud Yoshev lifneihem v'roy lahora kegon Shimon ben Azai. Yochel yali potter. I might think he's pot from a korban chatos. Talmud lomar biasosa achas. Yochida osal pi atzmo chayev. Oros bezdin potur. And who is the Yochid Osal Piatzmo who's chayv a korban? That's going to be Shimon ben Azai. So you see, Abai, it's explicit in this Brisa that even a great scholar like Shimon ben Azai in this context is called a Talmud. And he brings a korban chatos as a shogeg and not malchus as a mezid. So now the question is obvious. Wait a second. This is the greatest scholar in the generation, and he goes ahead and he eats chalev, and you're telling me he brings a korban chatos as a shogeg, he's a mezid. Because toy b'mitzvah l'shmo d'vrei chachamim. The reason why he's called a shogeg is because he thinks that when the Torah says lo sasur mikol shayarucha, even if they tell you that your right hand is your left hand is your right hand, you rely on Bezdin, and that's your obligation. Torah says lo tasur, don't deviate. So therefore, he's not amazed because he understood that since Bezdin issued that ruling that permits him to eat the chalev, he eats the chalev. So therefore, when Rava says, interpreted our Mishnah, that a Talmud is someone like Shimon ben Azai or Shimon ben Zoma, the reason why they have the category of a shogeg and they bring a korban chatas of a shogeg is because they made a mistake as far as mitzvah l'shmoa b'divrei chacham. So it comes out at the end of the day that mitzvah l'shmoa b'divrei chachamim does not apply over here. And therefore, they made a mistake by eating the chalev, and they're liable as a shogeg. I mean, they had a justifiable error here, but they're liable for eating chalev. I mean, how do you square that with the fact that Chazal say, "Afilu omer lecha al yamin shu smol val smol shu yamin"? So this is really, really complicated, but I'll just tell you superficially what I got out of it is that, as a general rule, al yamin shu smol, etc., but if you're not going out and teaching and contradicting the decision of Bezdin because of lo tosur, that you can't do, but in your own personal life and hitnagut, how do you say, in your own observance of the law, you have to know that you're not allowed to eat this chalev. And therefore, if you eat the chalev, you may have made a mistake thinking that you should eat the chalev and you're a shogeg, but nevertheless, you violated the isur of chalev. All right, let's go on. The Mishnah says at the end a general klal, which always has to be interpreted, what does it add? That when you parted from a korban chatos by eating chalev b'shogeg, that's only if he was tole atzmo bebezdin, but if he was tole biatzmo, then he's chayav. Lasuye mai, lasuye mevayit b'hora. So again, this is very difficult for me because what's the difference between mevayit b'hora and a mumar? We said a mumar is not included in the chiv, but this guy is included in the chiv. So apparently, again, this is the best I can do. He's not someone who rebels against the entire Torah, but in this particular case, he's mevayit b'hora. And again, just to quote one line here, I mean, this is a whole long. He says he's persisting in his established conduct of disregarding the court's authority, acting on the basis of his own judgment, and therefore he's held responsible for his error, and he has to bring a chatos yochid. Now the Mishnah goes on and says Tole bebezdin, that he's potter because he relied on the ruling of the court. Lasuye, what is this coming to include? Horu bezdin v'yadu shetov v'chazru b'hem. Here's a case where Bezdin issued a ruling, and they were matir, and they said you're allowed to eat this chalev. And then, when they realized their error, they retracted their ruling. He did not know about the retraction of their ruling, but rather acted on the court's initial erroneous ruling. And the Mishnah teaches that although the court had already realized their error and retracted their ruling, nevertheless, he is potter because he relied on the original ruling of the Bezdin. That's why he ate the chayil. Gemara says, Ha beheja katanile, even though it's explicit in the Mishnah. Okay, we didn't get to the Mishnah on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, but there's Mefurash. Tani v'hada mefar. Sometimes the Mishnah will give you a general statement and then it'll explicitly mention the particulars. Okay. Now, honestly, I wish it was 9:30 and not 10:30. So it's up to you if you want to stick around. But now the going gets really rough. So again, Tola bebezdin is pot. Right? So this person relied on the erroneous ruling of the court, and he doesn't have to bring a chatas. Now, the Mishnah seems to assume that he's an individual relying on the erroneous psak of Bezdin, ate the chelev, and he's potter. Not because a majority of the Jewish people relied on the psak of Bezdin, and therefore there's a chiyuv of par helim davashal tzibur. There is no par helim davashal tzibur. The majority of the people did not rely on Bezdin and make this mistake. He relied on Bezdin as an individual. So again, the sugya that we're about to embark upon vacillates and presents a machloks about the following issue. Why is the individual potter from chatas? Is it because he's part of the tzibur, and the tzibur is going to bring the chatas of carbon helim davashal tzibur? So there's a new poter that exempts him from a chatas yachid because he's included in the tzibur that's bringing a chatas yachid. Or no, the reason why he's exempt from a chatas yachid is because he relied on Bezdin. And then Afkamina is going to be in a case where there is no par helim dover shel tibur. If I say that he's really chayav because he did this maisa of eating chelev b'shogeg, but there's a halach that he participates in the carbon tzibur, helim dover shel tibur, then what about a case where he violated the Isser of Achilas Chelev, but there is no par helim dover shel tzibur because there wasn't a majority of people? In that case, he'd be chayav. But our Mishnah seems to take the other approach, the other definition. No, anyone who relies on the ruling of Bezdin and therefore eats chelev based on the ruling of Bezdin is potter, whether or not there will be a par helim dover shel tzibur. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul Zu Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah represents that opinion, but it's only an opinion of one Tana that says that there's no chiv carbon if he relied on Bezdin. Aval Chachama Omrim Yachid Shasa Baraz Bezdin Chayav. If an individual ate chelev based on the ruling of Bezdin, but there's no majority of the people, and therefore there's no power Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. He cannot claim that he lashes on and participates in the kapara process of the power Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, because there is no power Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, then he's chayav, even though he relied on Bezdin. My Rabbi Yehuda, where did you, Shmuel, get this Rabbi Yehuda from? The Sanya we learned in a Brisa. V'im nefesh achas techta b'shkaga ba'asosa. Now there are three words here in this pasuk, each of which qualify as what we call a miut, an exclusion. Harei l'shlosha miutim, because we have achas, that's a miut, and then we have nefesh, that's a miut, and finally we have ba'asosa. And from the word basosa, we derive ha'osim v'piyatzon chayev ha'oras bezdin potter. If he relied on bezdin, he's potter. Because that's not called basosa. Basosa means his own decision, his own initiative. And all of this is Rabbi Yehuda. My Rabbana, how do you know, Shmuel, that the Rabbana disagree with Rabbi Yehuda? The Sanya we learned in a Brisa, which is apparently a Torah's Kohanim. Right, the ratio of this Brisa doesn't appear in our Gemara. Basosa yochel yochid sha'asa chayev shnayim sha'asu p'turim tabalo miyama oretz afilu merubim. Okay, fine. Adayin ani omer miut kohol shechatu chayovim. I'm going to insist, and this is going to be the Rabbanan against Rabbi Yehuda, that if it's only the miut kol that ate that chelev based on the erroneous decision and ruling of the Beis Din, then that miut kol, each member of that miut, of that minority, has to bring his own carbon chata. And the reason for that is because ein Beis Din mevi'in al yadein par. Since you don't have the majority of the people, there's no par helim davar shel tzibur. You can't hide behind the par helim davar because there is no par helim davar shel tzibur. Rov kahol shechatu yipturim. But in a case where most of the community of Israel violated this Isur and they ate the chelev based on the erroneous decision of Beis Din, in that case, I would think that he could hold on to the coattails and ride the wave of the chatos of the tzibur, and if he doesn't have any chiyuv of bringing his own chatos based on the fact that he ate chelev, sharei Beis Din mevi'in al yideihem par. Beis Din is really representing every member of the tzibur, and therefore there's no reason for you to bring a chatos. Talmud lomer me'ama aretz afilu ruba v'afilu kula. Now, the simple reading of this brisa seems to indicate that even in a case where the majority and every last member of Klal Yisrael violated this Isur Chelev, and they're going to bring a patas par chatas shel tzibur helim davar shel tzibur, nevertheless each individual has to bring his own chatas in addition. However, Rabbi Yehuda is now going to clarify the brisa. What is the brisa dealing with? Ilem v'shigas ma'aseh Beis Din shelo b'hora. Why is the brisa mentioning Beis Din? If we're talking about shigas ma'aseh, which means that he had a shogeg on his own, Beis Din mai aviditayu shelo b'horas Beis Din. There was no horas Beis Din. It was only his decision. And Beis Din mimaisei shelo b'hora, and yet the brisa says that Beis Din is going to bring the helim davar shel tzibur, but there was no hora. Eli, you have no choice but to assume there was horas Beis Din, and Beis Din made hora betos. This is also difficult because for ha ki ksiv, when it says me'ama aretz, which is going to be machayev achatos, even in a case where Rov Tzibur violated that Iser Chelev, is Beshigas Maisa Hudiksiv. Okay, now if we can figure out these four words, Beshigas Maisa Hudiksiv is where I got stuck, we'll be in good shape. For some reason, which right now is not crystal clear to me, the words Am Ha'aretz, May Am Ha'aretz, again, it's a little bit too small for me to see the vowels here. I had a punch in the eye yesterday, right? So, but I think it's May Am Ha'aretz. So those words somehow indicate that it's a case of Shigas Maisa. Again, Shigas Maisa, let's just get the terminology, means that there was no Horas Bezdin. It was his personal mistake. But now we're saying that the Brisa is talking about a case of Ruba and Bezdin Mevim Al Yudayim Par Helim Dovashal Tzibur, because the majority of the people violated based on the Horas Bezdin. So we are talking about a case of a mistaken Horas Bezdin. We're not talking about a case of Shigas Maisa. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says this Brisa is very problematic. Because on the one hand, it mentions the Horas Bezdin. So you can't tell me we're talking about a case of Shigas Maisa. On the other hand, it says May Am Ha'aretz, and somehow May Am Ha'aretz indicates Shigas Maisa. So what are we talking about? Shigas Bezdin or Shigas Maisa? You can't tell me we're talking about Shigas Maisa without Bezdin, because it says that Bezdin Mevim Al Yudayim Par. On the other hand, you can't tell me that we're talking about a Shigas Bezdin because it says May Am Ha'aretz. And the words May Am Ha'aretz indicate that we're talking about one member of the community who made his own mistake, which means Shigas Maisa. And that mistake was without an erroneous Hora of Bezdin. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, in order to work out and smooth out this brisa so that it makes somehow sense, hachikam, we're going to have to say the following. Miut kol shechatu b'shgagas maisa. This is fascinating. We're talking about shigas maisa, which means that the individual ate the chelev not relying on Bezdin. It was his own mistake. And yet, the halacha of chiyuv chatos for a yachid will depend upon how many people made that same mistake. So if it was miut kol, only individuals, the minority of the people, made that mistake, then chayavim, each one has to bring a korban chatos. And why is that? It's because she'ein bezdin mevim al yidei par behora. Since it was only a majority of the people, there would be no, again, it's all a theoretical question because we're talking about Shigas Maisa. So Shigas Maisa means there was no erroneous, mistaken Hora of Bezdin. But if the majority of the people of Israel, again, I don't know how this could happen, but the majority of the community of Israel would mistakenly eat this chelev without a Horas Bezdin, had there been a Horas Bezdin, there would have been a par helim dovashel tzibur. Ha'hein chayavim. So if I understand correctly, the theoretical possibility that Bezdin had issued an erroneous psak is enough. And then, since it's the majority that followed and ate that chaylev, they have a parat helim dov shel tzibur. Therefore, in this case where it was a shigas maisa and there was no erroneous, but it lends itself to the theoretical possibility of a carbon helim dov shel tzibur. Therefore, in this case, shigas maisa will not generate a chiyuv carbon. Yachol rov tzibur sha'asu b'shigas maisu p'turim. So it's very strange. Even though each individual did his shogig on his own, and had it been a minority of the people who did that same shogig and ate the chalif, then each individual member would have to bring chatzis. But now that it's the majority, they would be pturim. Why? Shaharei bezdin meviim alehem par hara. Meaning, had there been a haras bezdin b'tos in that set of circumstance, and the majority of Israel ate the chalif, then they would have to bring a par helim dov shel tzibur. In such a case, I might think, it might entertain and cross my mind that every member of this majority would be potter from a chatas. Talmud lomar me'am ha'aretz, and me'am ha'aretz apparently means from the general population, afilu ruba. Even if rov of the tzibur inadvertently ate that chalef without an erroneous horah of bezdin, they're each chayav a carbon chatas, what we call a chatas yafin. Even though had there been an erroneous psak of bezdin, they would not bring a chatas. And that's going to be the shita of the Rabbanan of Rabbi Yehuda, that in a case of shigas maisa, just one second. If I understand correctly, even though the people ate chelev, just one second, I just want to make sure I get this right. Even though the individual in Shigas Maisa ate the chalev not because he was relying on the Horas Bezdin. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda says he's potur. So again, let me go over this. According to Rabbi Yehuda, everything depends upon the root cause of his mistaken eating of the chelik. And if the root cause was that he relied on Bezdin, then he is potter. The Chachamim say no. You need a par helim davar shel tzib. If there's no par helim davar shel tzibur, then even though he relied on the mistaken ruling of Bezdin, he's chayav. Because of the fact that he ate chelev b'shogeg, and there was no par helim davar shel tzibur. So let's say again, if the minority of the people relied on Bezdin and they ate the chelev, there's no korban helim davar shel tzibur. Here's where we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda would say he's potter. Why? Because he relied on Bezdin. It was told b'das Bezdin. And the Chacham is saying no, he's chayav. He does bring his personal, private chatos because there's no par helim davar shel tzibur. And the Amora of Yehuda proved this shita the Chachamim from the Brisa. Because what did the Brisa say? The Brisa says that I might say that if the minority of the kol sinned, each one has to bring his own chatos. Because there's no par helim davar shel tzibur if it's only the minority. The majority, on the other hand, have to bring a korban chatos because there was no Horayos Bezdin. And if there was no Horayos Bezdin, and it's called what? Shigas Maisa. So they cannot be covered by the Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. They have to bring their own korban. Omer of Papa Mimai. Again, this is sugi you have to go over it a million times. How do you see in the Brisa a proof to draw the conclusion that the individuals who follow Bezdin are nevertheless chayav. Again, if it's a minority, are chayav in a personal individual karmachatos, still below haim velo Bezdin. Maybe what the Bryce is saying is that in a case where the miut of the tzibur followed the erroneous psak of Bezdin, nobody brings a chatos, neither the tzibur, the Helim Dover Shati, because it wasn't a majority, nor the Yachid because he was relying on Bezdin. So how do you know from this price that the Chachamim will definitely disagree with Rabbi Yehuda? Hachi, says the Gemara, if Rav Papa is right and lo hain for lo Bezdin, then my area to come hadar al ruba lechiyuv lav mechlal de miut bahora kaimale de mechaya bahora. Why does the Tana go out of his way to find a drasha to teach us that if most of the tzibur violated this isur, and there was no horas bezdin, that they each have to bring a chiyuv lav michlal, why isn't it included in the case of a minority? Why do you need a special drasha from the majority? The miyat bo'ara kaimelu de mechai bo'ara. Isn't it enough to tell me that the minority v'nahada bereisha al miuta de mechayev b'shigas maisa? According to a papa, if an individual relied on the court, he's potter from a chatos, then the Tana should have derived first that a miut is chayiv for shigas ma'isa without a court ruling, and the chayiv chatos ula basof, and then afterwards neheder al ruba l'chiyuv b'shigas ma'isa. In a case where the majority, without a court ruling, violated the isra chelev. Elolav midalo mahadar al miut emachayvim b'shigas ma'isa. The Tana started by being mechayev each individual in a case of miut, where there was no court decision to be chayev a chatos yochid ubesof mahadar, and then he goes on to look for a source for ruba lechiv b'shigas ma'isa. Shma mina, we derive from that miut bahora chayavin hem kizba useira, that if there was a horas bezdin but only the minority acted based on this horas bezdin, then each one is chayav a karban katos yochid, which is called a kizba or a seira. V'shalo horas shigas ma'isa. But if they violated this isur of chelev without any ruling of bezdin, but through, like we said before, they switched it chayavin. Okay, we'll stop here. As I said before, it's a tough start. Kol Ascholas Kosho said it requires a lot of work. The Gemara is analyzing a brisa this way and that way with all sorts of diyukim. Rav Yehuda, Rav Papa, each one. But the basic issue is a person who relied on Bezdin as an individual when there's no chiyuv on the tzibur itself. Does he have to bring a chatos yochid? Which, according to the Amora of Yehuda, there's a machlokus between the Tanner of Yehuda, Rebbe Yehuda, we'll call him, and the Chacham. Okay, then we'll stop here.